I'd have to Google what the formal title it is. Okay. Now, Michael Sherver is an atheist. He's a skeptic, and he's a staunch promoter of evolution. Now, he acknowledges, as well as other authors, that Darwin didn't discover anything. He plagiarized other people's works, and in large part, from Alfred Russel Wallace, who Shermer, who was an expert, who wrote his doctoral dissertation on Alfred Russel Wallace, said that Alfred Russel Wallace was the so-called co-discoverer of natural selection. Now, it is one thing to propose a materialistic explanation for the complexity of the animal kingdom. That is not the same thing as that he discovered it.
Are you Darth Dawkins?
Okay.
Are you stupid?
Yes, it
Because
is.
wait, hold on. It's atomic theory. There's quantum theory, and then there's molecular theory. All of these were discovered, yet they're called theories, right? They're the same thing.
Sir, listen to me.
This guy's
It
Darth.
never ceases to amaze
I don't even know why
me.
he's
It
allowed
never
to
ceases to
interrupt
amaze
him.
me
Hey, you
that
guys are
when
interrupting
people
him, please
speak
stop.
out of ignorance, they think they're not.
You
Now,
can't interrupt him, but he can interrupt you.
the past is
That's
not.
literally
The
Darth
past
Dawkins.
is not
Yeah, like
testable.
literally.
All right, all
Stop
right. So what I'm
interrupting,
going to
guys.
do is, what I'll do is, I'll just kill my sound, so I'm not distracted by you guys over
I
talking.
mean, atoms
okay?
are always there, but
Now, when we
nobody
talk
knew they were
about,
there. You know what I mean?
how do you know that? How do you know atoms were always there? Are atoms eternal?
What?
Are atoms eternal?
I'm sorry. You're just so. I'm ignorant. You're ignorant, dude.
Okay, I'm just going to turn you down because obviously you guys
There's no way.
Damn, dude, you crushed him, dude. Good job.
Oh god.
Okay, all right.
Wait,
So
argument.
getting back,
You're
getting
taking
back
over
to
the
Charles
conversation.
Darwin.
We're talking about poetry.
Darwin came up. Darwin decided to abandon his previously very soft theistic outlook, and he decided to adopt a materialistic framework. You can even see it in his own diaries. He referred to himself as a materialist. He wrote in his own diaries that his materialistic explanation of the origin of the complexity of life would murder God. Okay? Now, the fact of the matter is, he didn't discover anything unless, of course, you've already drunk the Kool-Aid and you believe that evolution is akin to a fact, right? Charles Darwin, what he did is he borrowed liberally from several other proponents of subtypes of evolution, and he popularized it into the book, The Origin of the Species. It's simply a materialistic explanation. He did not discover the origin of the species. He simply proposed a materialistic explanation for how it could be.
So, Darth, thank you for mentioning this, but what we were actually discussing before was we're talking about the Quran and whether or not the linguistic miracle of the Quran is a justification for
Right,
truth.
but then somebody
We can change the
started
subject to this if you
extolling
want
the
to.
disc. I didn't change the subject. I
Well-
was addressing the subject that
Oh, wait.
somebody else brought up.
Yeah, we
Darth,
could change the subject.
No, wait,
but
guys.
we're
There are two
derailing-
comments. Just a
because before-
second.
I was talking to Mo before he got here. I'm just trying to clarify. I was talking to Mo before he got here. We were talking about the miracles that could prove the Quran, and he brought up the linguistic miracle of the Quran itself, and
Yeah,
said
I was
that the
listening
Quran.
to that.
Yeah, has, okay,
Yeah,
were
you don't
there.
need to recap. I heard
Okay,
it.
good.
Okay, how about
All right.
this? Duncan, there are two conversations that want to be happening here. How about you go to a different chat? People who want to continue the argument follow, or you guys can agree on one argument here. I personally don't mind.
Actually, I was commenting on one assertion that somebody said he discovered evolution. There was no
Figured
discovery.
out. The actual word that I used was figured out.
He didn't figure it out. He simply proposed a materialistic explanation that became a paradigm.
Darth, what do you think of Fodor's argument? Jerry Fodor?
Charles
the
Darwin may have
The last
borrowed some
time I
ideas
read
from
about Fodor
Wallace,
was a
right?
couple of years ago, so I'd have to go back and read it to refresh my memory on his position.
I think he makes a good argument against natural selection. And it's,
young. Okay, yeah, I didn't know that was you. I'm going to turn your mic down. Yeah. Go away, little.
Funny, dude.
I mean, if we want to, we could change the subject to debating whether natural selection is a correct explanation for the origin of the species.
I didn't introduce that.
I thought that's what you wanted to do.
No, I simply said Charles Darwin didn't discover anything, but people who believe his materialistic explanation that it actually happened, and his writing was probably that which most popularized this notion. They think it was a discovery. It wasn't a discovery at all.
Right. So he explained the mechanism of natural selection in the book. I didn't say that
he attempts
discovered
to.
it.
He attempts to. Does
And
he? Does he
just find
account?
on
Wait a minute.
with
Excuse
him.
me. Does he? Hold on. Hold on. He talks about the survival of the fittest. That doesn't.
Potato
That doesn't
Man, you gonna
explain.
moderate?
That doesn't.
So
That doesn't.
most
Say, that doesn't
historians of
explain the
science don't
arrival of
believe
new
that
genetic
Darwin
information, which
plagiarized
you will
Wallace
need
in any
to have a universal common ancestor.
So now someone replied to Darth, and Darth, please don't interrupt him. If you want to continue this debate, everyone.
So my understanding is that the term evolution, or the descendants of animals from previous animals, was actually believed by many people. However, what was not commonly understood, and maybe Wallace was onto this. I don't know as much about Wallace, to be fair. So, I'm not going to argue that. But it was understood by a lot of different people, all the way back to Democritus in Greek times, that animals seem to increase in complexity, and that there was probably a descendance from earlier animals to newer animals. A lot of people
Where'd you get the idea that they increase in complexity? Where'd you get that from?
I'm telling you what people believed. A lot of people believe this. The term or the concept of evolution wasn't new when Darwin proposed it. I agree with you.
Yeah, his grandfather was a promotion of transmutation.
Yeah. So the idea that animals changed or that descended and so on wasn't a completely new idea.
Yeah,
What
I
my
know all
understanding
this
is-
stuff. Are you trying to educate me?
I'm responding to you. So let me finish.
Okay, because I know
So-
all this.
That's fine. My understanding is that he was mostly known for explaining the mechanism of natural selection, which explained how this actually worked. Prior to the publication of The Origin of Species, most people weren't sure how this process occurred. And the natural selection mechanism was explained well enough in the book that it convinced people, as you said, to become the dominant paradigm, which we still use today.
Yeah, well, what he proposed has not been observed. Okay, natural selection means the survival of that which is fit. It doesn't explain the arrival of the fittest, meaning the arrival of new, complex, long genetic information giving rise to higher and higher levels of complex anatomy and physiology. Darwin just merely assumed that if there were tiny incremental changes and they provided for an increase of fitness, that this would produce a universal common ancestry. It's all upon the unfounded, unobserved supposition that small changes can accrue to produce complex hierarchical information that didn't exist before.
Yeah, so what you call unobserved is used in laboratories to actually produce changes in organisms.
Yeah, you don't
along
know what you're
predictable
talking
lines.
about.
Hey,
You
Duncan,
don't know
here
what you're
is
talking
back.
about.
Do you know what
Show me where there's an observation where random mutations
Mute him,
produces
potato.
an ever increasing of hierarchical genetic information.
Hey, Duncan,
You know-
he respected you and let you finish, so please don't interrupt him next time.
Yeah, can you answer my question?
Yeah, are you familiar with Methuselah flies? Just to pick an example.
Yeah, I'm familiar with all that stuff. Beneficial
Can you explain
mutations
Methuselah
that
flies?
have the beneficial mutations that we do observe that might produce a novel effect and in some instances provide an increase of fitness and environment does not in itself demonstrate that random mutations will accrue to produce new genetic information, developing an ever increase of hierarchical genetic information resulting in a universal common ancestry. You see, you guys have been duped to believe that the rare instances of beneficial mutations is sufficient to explain the arrival in a step-by-step fashion of hierarchical genetic information. It doesn't.
So in Methuselah flies, you start out with flies that don't live very long, and you give them a selection pressure, which is how natural selection works.
I
You have
know all
pressures
this.
which favor certain things. So then we could have explained Methuselah flies. I asked you to, but you didn't.
I
What
know all
happens
this.
is-
It's not
Yeah,
relevant.
but other people here don't. So I'm going to
Yeah,
explain
but
it
you're
for them
talking
anyway.
to me, aren't you?
I am.
No,
But
he's talking to
you
all
say
of
that
us
you
right
know
now.
about Methuselah flies, but if you knew about them, then you might have explained them. but you
No,
didn't.
sir. What we're talking about, how do you account for the arrival of new hierarchical information?
They create a selection pressure which favors reproducing later in their lifespan. The result is that the flies evolved to have longer and longer lifespans through a whole series of overlapping positive mutations which support that.
Yeah,
And all they do
that
is
doesn't
let the
support
generations
universal common
successively
ancestry.
accumulate. I didn't say it proves a common ancestry. What I explained is the mechanism of natural selection is
Yeah.
observed predictably and utilized to actually generate new
Yeah.
organisms.
Well, natural selection. See, if certain in the allele frequencies, okay, if for example one offspring has a better immune system than the other, that one will tend to survive given a different environment. That doesn't explain the arrival of complex hierarchical information, which you will need ever increasing step by step over long periods of time to produce a universal common ancestry. It is simply the fundamental assumption of Darwinists that this is what happened, but there's no observational support for it, even in beneficial
What you're
mutation.
questioning is, okay, what you're questioning is the feasibility of abiogenesis.
No, I'm not discussing that.
That seems to be what you're suggesting.
No, sir. I obviously see. If you actually knew what you're talking about, then you would understand that I was not talking about abiogenesis. I was not talking about the arrival of the first life. What I'm talking about is when we take, let's say, the least complex organism that exists, and you go to the human genome, you need an ever increasing of hierarchical genetic information that will result in new complex anatomy and physiology that didn't previously exist before. Okay, the observation of beneficial mutations inside the laboratory and out that produces novel effects that may produce an increase of fitness in environment does not support that random mutations can build the information system of the genome. Now, if you'd like to provide me some observational support where random mutations, even beneficial mutations, have been shown to produce all new hierarchical genetic information, please let me know.
So can you state what you mean by hierarchical genetic information?
Yeah, if we take a look at the anatomy and physiology of the most complex creatures on the planet, and then downward where they have systems where it's less complex, we have hierarchies of genetic information. Okay, we have hierarchies upon hierarchies of genetic information, and we know that not only just from examining the genetic code, but we can just look at the hierarchy of the complexity of body systems and organs in the body. Okay, now those body plans, those supremely complex anatomical features, okay, have to be produced by an ever-increasing information system in the genome. Well, what's the mechanism that can produce that? Appealing to beneficial mutations doesn't answer the question.
Why not?
Well, it doesn't show that beneficial mutations can accrue sufficiently to build new complex information, producing new hierarchies of genetic information, resulting in new complex anatomy and physiology that didn't previously exist. Let me give you an example. I'm sure you're aware that they have mutated E. coli in millions of generations. You know that experiment?
Commonly studied, yeah.
Yeah. And what they found is that there are certain E. coli's that mutate where they are able to digest certain substances where they couldn't before. And they go, oh, look at that evolution. No, that is not evolution a la evidence that mutations can produce a hierarchy of new information. All it simply was with mutations on previously existing complex genetic code for digestion in the organism where it could digest a substance that it previously couldn't before. That's not an increase of complex genetic information yielding new complex anatomy and physiology that didn't exist before.
So it seems to me what you're saying is you're saying that an ability can change by degree, but you can't generate a new ability. That's what you're referring to when you say
no, that's not what I said. What I said was we do not observe the capability of random mutations to do that. It's never been observed. It is simply supposed.
Your supposed is believed by every evolutionary scientist in the world.
That doesn't matter. Appealing to the standard model. Listen to me. Do you know anything about the philosophy of science?
I do, yeah.
Okay, you do know that paradigms come and go in the course of sciences?
Yeah.
Okay, now, do you believe in the standard model of cosmogony?
In terms of like Big Bang and
Yeah, do you accept
the
that?
standard model of physics?
Yeah,
That's
do
what
you
physicists
yeah,
are
do you
currently
accept the standard
on
model of
correct
cosmogony today?
for the moment.
Okay, now do you know that it was a little more than a generation ago where this was not on the scene, and the standard model was the steady state theory, and because of one simple observation, it was overthrown.
Right, which is the
So
whole
paradigm.
point of
Okay,
standard
so the
process.
more that you understand about the history and philosophy of science, you know that having a consensus on a particular overarching paradigm is not a guarantee that it is true. It just means it's the most popular.
Yeah, of course. The whole point of falsification is error elimination,
Well,
not to claim that you have
your
verification.
worldview can't provide for falsification.
No, I said that the whole point of the philosophy of science today is falsificationism, not verificationism. What you're
Right.
insisting on
Okay.
is
Yeah. Okay. So let me
verification.
ask: are you talking about
You're asking for
Popperianism?
verification.
Are
You're
you
saying,
talking
I
about
want
Karl
to.
Popper?
Yeah.
Okay, now can you explain to me, how does your model of reality provide for falsifying anything? Do you ever heard of W.V. Quine and the problem of it's called confirmation holism or underdeterminism?
Exactly. So with underdetermination,
Okay,
you could have a situation where there are
can you
multiple senses
actually
competing
falsify
for.
something based upon underdeterminism?
Not at the moment, no. But
Oh,
the whole
okay,
point
good.
is to continue to observe
Verification,
until you get enough
there is
information to
no
falsify,
true verification in a materialistic outlook, and there's no true falsification.
which is its greatest strength. That's the whole point, is that you maintain criticism, you maintain open-mindedness, right?
Yeah,
So
but you don't know that
your
anything
claim,
falsifies anything, do you?
we know that the best data that we have supports the best theories that we have, and if we
No,
find any data that
you're not
contradicts them,
you're
we
not
throw them out.
understanding what is deemed to be
Oh my
what is
God.
deemed to be best is just simply an appeal to a prevailing paradigm.
No, it's
Paradigms
what
come and go.
holds up to error elimination.
Have you ever
This
heard of Thomas Kuhn?
this guy only
Yes,
wants to let himself
Okay,
talk.
what was the title of his monumental work in the philosophy of science?
the structure of scientific revolution,
Right,
I
and
believe,
what's the main premise of that work?
that paradigms shift and that scientists
Yeah,
in different eras are blind in many ways to the
right,
realization
and
of
the
error.
point of the book is there's no guarantee that because a paradigm is held in widespread consensus that it's true, because they
Right, I
come
don't
and
need a
go.
guarantee. You don't understand. I don't need a guarantee, nor does any other scientist to do the work of science. Science carries
Okay,
on without guarantees.
really?
So
Okay,
your
so
debate
when you
tactic
say
is
science
irrelevant.
works on, do you mean a knowledge base of how things work?
Yeah.
Okay, do you or anyone else from your model of reality know how things work?
Enough to do science in a laboratory that works
Okay,
by
good. Can you tell me
truthfully
how
by
things
experiments.
work?
Yeah.
Can you tell me then how things work at a fundamental level from your model?
We don't understand everything,
No,
and
no,
that's the
please don't
point.
listen. Please don't give me this we crap. I'm talking to you. Can you tell me how things work at a basic or a fundamental level?
Of course not. I'm not a physicist. No.
Okay, can a physicist tell me in a way that he cannot be wrong how things work?
There's no scientist who will say they cannot be wrong. You're literally contradicting
Okay,
Kuhn and
no.
Popper, which you just quoted.
Now, well, you're telling me about evolution, about how things work. Do you know how things work?
We have a model, and the model.
I don't care if you have a model.
I get that you don't care, but you
Do you
quote this
know
rocket
that
science, but you don't seem to believe in
model?
it.
Do you know that model is what actually happened?
No, we just know that it's the best model that we have
Okay,
currently.
how do you know? Okay, how do you know it's the best? Do you have the capacity in your model of reality to demarcate between a world where things work in terms of causal relations and a world where it's a sea of unrelated and unconnected events? Can you demarcate between those two?
We determined the current
No,
model
we.
by
I asked you, not we. I'm not talking to we.
I understand the current model to be an intersubjective process of error elimination. And as
Okay,
long as
that's not
you're
an answer to my
critically
question.
rational,
That's not an answer to
I'm
my question.
explaining.
That's
I
not an
tried
answer
to
to
answer
my
your question.
question.
You didn't understand.
Okay, can you demarcate or determine that the myriad of events around us are the product of just simply spontaneous eruption, or that the events around us are the product of causal relations and connections? Do you choose one over the other?
Are you asking if I'm a hard determinist or something?
No, sir. I'm asking you which explanation do you choose?
Chaos or order, that's what he's asking.
Do you
Yeah,
okay?
generally,
do you
science-
operate in a world? Does your existence and the events around you are they unrelated and unconnected?
Generally, my model is one of understanding causalities and effects due to causalities, right? However, I
so
don't
you
claim my model.
reject the notion. So you reject the notion that all events are unrelated and unconnected to other events. Is that correct?
So you're just asking me a whole bunch of questions which don't.
No, you
seem to
keep
be leading
making assertions, scientific assertions, and I want to see if your assertions hold. Now, is it your position in terms of your concept of the model of cosmogony and the model of the origin of the species? Okay, is this in virtue of a system where there are causal relations and connections between events? Or is it your position that all of the events in existence are unrelated to each other?
Naturally, we relate events to each other.
There's
I
no we
relate
here. I'm
events to each
asking
other.
you. I'm
Yeah,
not
I get
talking to
that.
a group
I get
of
that.
people.
Yeah.
I'm asking you.
Yeah, so I relate events to each other in sequence, obviously, because they come one after another, and I relate events that occur to me to those that I can verify with other
Okay.
people
Why do
intersubjectively.
you select that there are causal relations rather than events are unconnected?
Because that's how we understand things. That's
No.
how I understand.
Let's stop with the we. Okay. And when you say you understand it, knowledge is understanding is akin to knowledge. Are you telling me that you know that there are causal relations, or that you just believe it?
I interpret what my senses show me as causal relationships.
Well, here's the
between-
problem with that. Sense perception presuppose causal relations. So are there causal relations?
I perceive causal relations.
No, sir, you're not understanding this, okay? When I ask you, are there causal relations? Are you invoking sense perception as a justification that it is the case that there are causal relations?
No. I'm
Okay,
invoking
so
that
so it's okay.
I perceive a series of events. Which seem
Right.
to be
Okay. Now,
connected to
if
each other, and that
causality
relations.
exists, then you might have one of the necessary conditions for perception. But that's not addressing my questions. My question is, are there causal relations between the myriad of events?
He's basically asking about the chain reaction.
Yeah. Please don't interrupt. He's a very intelligent person.
Yeah, I perceive a chain of causal relations.
Please
However,
eliminate. No, that's not an answer to my question. That's the second time. That's the second time you gave a diversionary answer.
You've converted a conversation into just you querying me on a bunch of questions.
Right. Well, wait a minute.
Okay,
your answer saying I perceive it. That's a diversionary answer. Now, I'll ask the question a third time.
I'm not going to go down the rabbit hole with you anymore. Darth.
Okay.
This epistemology rabbit hole is unnecessary.
See, now what you're doing is now it's plan B. It's called abort the conversation. Now, you're invoking listen to me. You were invoking how evolution is, how science works. I'm getting down to the nitty-gritty. Now, what I want to know from you, okay, is how do you account that there are causal relations between events? When you answered me twice and you said I perceive causal relations, that's not an answer to my question. How did you determine that there are causal relations between events? Okay. How did you determine that there are causal relations between events?
Let's talk about evolution, which we were talking about before, not going down like everyone's bored. This is the epistemology rabbit hole.
Notice plan B, everybody. He can't answer the question, so now he wants to go back to evolution.
I would like to actually return back to the original conversation.
I'd like an answer.
Because this is getting.
Again, I'd like an answer in order to talk about evolution being a process. Okay, do you hold that evolution is or is not a process?
Evolution, which I understand to be the change in organisms over time.
Yeah, I don't need education. Is it a process? Yeah. Okay. Do processes require that there are causal relations between events?
Yeah, but this is just a boring
Okay, good.
epistemology
So
rabbit hole, Darth.
when you invoke evolution, you are implicitly asserting that there are causal relations. Can you give me a rational accounting that for the myriad of events that occur, that they are causal related or connected?
So you're going to take me all the way down and then say, how do you do that without God? It's boring.
No, and what would that answer is evasive. I want everyone in the room to notice that I have asked him a legitimate
We all know what's going
question
to happen,
within the
Darth.
We all know
philosophy
what's
of
gonna
You've
triads.
seen this a million
Listen,
times.
gentlemen, if
all
you're going to
know what's gonna
overtalk
happen. It's
me,
a
and
script,
if
dude.
you're going to white knight for him, then what you
We're
have
not.
demonstrated by white knighting, by
Now,
overtalking me
tell
and
us
white
We've heard
knighting,
this before,
you're
dude.
telling
We've
everyone in
heard
the
your
room that
argument
he has
before.
failed. Okay, I'm going to kill my sound. If anyone talks over me while I'm talking to 9, okay, I'll just kill my sound and then I won't hear you. So you won't accomplish. You'll just be speaking to other people in the room. Now, 9, when you advocate for evolution, you're advocating for a process which presupposes that there must a necessary condition is that there are causal relations. What I simply want to know from you, is it the case that there are causal relations, and on what basis do you assert so?
I'm not going to debate Presupp with you, man. This is a total
Okay,
tangent.
no, what we're talking about the metaphysical necessity to claim there are processes in your worldview. You're defending evolution from your worldview. Can your worldview defend evolution?
If you require anyone to defend any point to take them all the way down
Can
to like
your
solipsism,
worldview defend
then it's
evolution?
absurd.
Can your worldview defend evolution?
Can a person like myself argue for evolution without having an argument with you about solipsism?
Okay, I didn't bring in solipsism, sir. Then maybe you might want to look up the definition of solipsism. Okay, now, can your worldview defend at a foundational level that evolution is viable in terms that it's a process?
The scientific process that I believe in does not require verificationism. I don't
Okay.
need an
No, I
absolute
didn't. I'm
proof
not.
of everything.
I'm not invoking verification, sir. Either you didn't understand what my question was, or you're just being evasive, pretending like you're answering. Now,
You're evasive.
can your worldview provide the basis for that there are certain processes, including evolution? Now, the question that is outstanding that I've asked you is, how do you account for causal relations and connections? That's a necessary prerequisite for
I answered.
processes. Okay?
I said I perceive things one after another in
That's the
sequence.
third, you've answered the
connect
third time. That is not an answer to my question.
You just don't like my answer.
That is not an answer to my question. I didn't
Who
ask
said
you,
that you
I
can
didn't
determine
ask
right
you
and
what
wrong,
you,
jackass?
I didn't ask you if you perceived causality. I said, how do you account that it is the case that there's causality at all?
Because I perceive series of events which I connect.
Okay, now, do you understand that that answer is classically begging the question? You are presupposing the conclusion contained within the premise. Does sense perception require by necessity that causality exists first in order for sense perception to be viable?
That doesn't have a.
Can you answer my question, please?
Repeat it one more time. Does sense perception
Does sense
perception
require the prerequisite that causality exists in order for the invocation of sense perception to be viable?
So I assume that my interpretation of the world is based on some real world which I'm trying to interpret.
That's not an answer
And
to my question. Do you need me to
Let
repeat
me
it?
finish. I'm going to get to that, okay? So I assume that the world is real. And so I assume that for me to perceive something and for it to hold true, that must be that it is an actually true thing. But I can't be sure.
Okay, so do you have a rational accounting, okay, that there are causal relations between events?
Yeah, I rationalize that when I see events and then I make predictions about the future based on past
all right,
events.
yeah, you're either you're not understanding the question, or you're being completely evasive and disingenuous. When are you invoking sense perception as a rational accounting of causality?
I'm invoking a prediction which I make based on sense perception.
I didn't ask you about.
works.
I didn't ask you
My
about prediction.
rational.
Please
just don't like
address
my
my
answers.
question. No, it's not that I don't like your answer. Your answers are circuitous. You're avoiding the question.
You're not letting him finish.
Okay. Now, are you invoking sense perception as the justification that any causality at all exists?
Every single thing I experience is through sense perception. So sense perception on its own is not the justification. It's an accumulation of sense perceptions, such as
Okay.
that a pattern holds
Okay.
true. I make a
It
prediction.
doesn't.
based on a
Okay.
pattern,
This is
and the
all
pattern is
superfluous. What you just said is superfluous. Now, are you in fact using are you invoking the grouping or totality of your sense perception as a rational accounting that causality at all exists?
I'm grouping sense perception and using that to account that causality exists. Yeah.
Okay.
Mhm.
Now, do you know why that's a problem?
I'm sure you're going to tell me.
Okay. Does sense perception, in whatever form, does it require as a necessary prerequisite that causal relations exist first before sense perception can be meaningful and viable?
I assume that causality exists. Otherwise, I wouldn't be perceiving
Are
it
you
and able
giving
to
are
predict.
you giving me a rational accounting that it is the case that causality exists?
I perceive causality. It does not necessarily.
Okay, that's not
mean
an answer to
every
my question. That's the fifth
Let
time.
him
That's
finish.
the
Interrupting
fifth
me
time
again.
you've given me an
You
invasive
keep interrupting me.
response.
No,
Let
you
him
interrupt me
finish.
enough. So I get like
You're
That's
three
not
because
full
you
letting
words
him
in.
repeated the
talk.
same
That's
thing
the
again.
problem. Just
Okay.
because he can repeat
Yeah,
it and still be able to finish his point, you don't get the right to just fucking keep over talking him. Like, that's not how it works in this, sir, and you know that.
It does when he's around.
Yeah, if
No,
you heard
he's
my whole
bullshitting.
sentence, you might get a better sense of where I'm at. And if you're trying to guide me somewhere, you might be able to do that better. So just hear my whole sentence, okay? So you said, do you assume that causality exists essentially because
No, I
you
didn't
perceive
ask
it?
you that. I didn't ask you
Stop
that.
interrupting.
Okay, I
Now.
just joined. Duncan, please stop interrupting. Let him finish, and then you can deny everything or whatever you want to do after. Thank you.
Thank you, Potato.
Go ahead,
So then
IX.
restate your question.
Yeah,
Go.
by the way, for those of you who are hecklers out there, I can't hear you. I kill my sound the moment you are over talking and
Which
9
is
is not.
against server rules.
You can't do that because that's how you're
It's
going to
okay,
get
wait,
muted.
Yeah, I
Duncan.
can. I'm not
Wait,
individually
Duncan.
muting people.
Duncan, can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear.
Okay, yeah, I'll make sure people aren't being retarded. So
You're not doing a very good job of
I
modding.
just joined. I'm
He
sorry.
just
Okay,
joined, you fool.
my apologies then. If you just joined, that's my mistake. So 9, here's the question. Do you have a rational accounting that there are causal relations between events?
I rationalize that there are causal relations because I perceive them in groupings and make predictions based on them.
Okay. Are you invoking sense perception individually or collectively as a justification that causality at all?
That's my source of the information by which I reason.
Okay, I don't know what that means. Do you need me to repeat the question?
The specific way that you want me to answer, like if you have a very specific thing you want to hear, then give me an A or a B because I don't know what
Are
words are going to satisfy me.
are you invoking collective sense perception or individual sense perception as a means of accounting rationally for the existence that there are indeed causal relations between any?
It's not the words I would use, but sure.
Okay, now, when you invoke sense perception to justify that it is the case that there are causal relations, does sense perception as a viable concept require implicitly that causality exists? I'm not hearing your answer.
I tried to say this a few times before and you didn't accept my answer, so I'm trying to understand how you want to hear this. I'm trying to meet you at where you want it to go, but
Did you understand my question?
Yeah.
Can you repeat my question back to me?
You said, do I use sense perception as a justification for believing that causality exists as a prerequisite.
No, that wasn't my
for
last
sense
question. That
perception.
was my previous question, not my last
I was
question.
kind of grouping them together. The last part is basically
No, that wasn't my last
do you
question.
suppose that it's necessary for causality to exist?
Well, he was
I
also
said,
asking
I said
if
it's
it's
causality.
a level or
I said, hey, Mob, would you do me a favor and stop the hecklers? Now, we're having a very productive debate here, even though he's losing very badly. Now,
I don't even know what we're debating anymore.
does sense perception
Dawkins, you're losing like
necessarily
nothing else.
require the prerequisite of causality?
I believe it does, but I don't know for sure.
Okay. Well, then the point is, how do you have viability of sense perception? If you don't know that there's causality, okay, then what does sense perception mean? Because any descriptor that you're going to give me of sense perception is going to include some reference to causal relations. And the question that's still outstanding, how do you rationally account for causal relations? Because when you invoke sense perception, that's begging the question, because sense perception already entails within its meaning that causality already exists. So do you have a rational justification for causal relations as a foundation to argue that there are processes, including evolutionary processes?
My rationalization is that I use this to make predictions and act in the world. And
I'm not asking you about predictions, okay?
That is why I believe
making
it.
predictions, whether they come,
works.
if you make
let
predictions
him,
into the
Duncan,
future,
let him just finish, please.
And that was it. I use it.
Okay.
I make predictions. It works. That's why I believe it.
Well, first of all, when you say it works, you're just asserting what is the still outstanding question. When you say something works, you're saying that there is in some way causal relations and connections where some things have a certain result and others don't. Okay, that's not addressing the issue. The fact that you make predictions and some come true and some don't does not rationally designate whether that outcome that conforms your prediction is the result of pure happenstance and spontaneous generation, or that the outcome was the product from necessity. Now, what I'd like to know from you, and it's been like 25 minutes, can you give me a rational justification for causal relations, which will be the necessary foundation to argue for evolution?
So one, I don't think that this epistemology rabbit hole is necessary to have a discussion about
I'm
modern
waiting for an
science.
answer.
And two, I don't think that I have if you're talking, when you say irrational, if you mean like an a priori logical explanation based just on logic.
I want
No,
a rational account. I want a rational accounting that there are that causal relations exist.
Nine, you want to repeat that last part?
If what you want to hear is that I have a priori logical, purely rational explanation or justification for cause and effect, I don't. I have an experience-based one based on empirical observation.
No, experience, it begs the question. That's begging the question, which I'm sure you're well aware, you're a very intelligent person, that's a fallacy.
Yeah.
Okay, good. So how do you justify that there are causal relations? I'm waiting.
Because I perceive them.
No, that's the sixth time you gave the same stupid answer.
Do you want to give what you think
that's
I should
begging
say?
the question.
I don't
Are you
understand
aware
what
of the
you're
fact
getting
that that answer is begging the question?
I get that it's not satisfying to you.
No, I asked you
what
a
answer you
question,
wanna
and
hear.
again, you're being evasive, and I'm glad you're doing this. I am
I'm
delighted
not
that
trying
you're
to be
doing this,
evasive. I literally
because
don't know what you wanna
everybody
hear.
in the room can hear your evasive answer. I asked you the
I
following
don't
question.
even know what you
When you
want,
say
though.
that you perceive causality, that is the answer you gave me to, can you justify that there are causal relations at all? And I said to you, do you realize that that answer is begging the question?
Do you want me to just say no?
I'd like an honest answer instead of filibuster.
Yeah, if it's a purely rational argument, I don't have one.
Okay, so you don't have a rational foundation that there are processes, and you don't have a rational basis for evolution then. So your advocacy of the process of evolution is without rational justification at its most foundational level.
Well, I'm
I'll
not a
give you a heads up,
precept
just say it's part
epistemologist,
of
right? I don't
the
claim to have absolute
I'm
knowledge.
sorry,
that
I can't hear you.
precedes-
Somebody was over talking.
Yeah,
Sorry.
Chum, can you just wait your turn? Thank you.
Yeah, I'm not a precept.
Yeah, and by the way, Chum,
epistemologist.
you will be ignored because you're a troll and somebody who
talking to you,
secretly
it's okay.
records and shares it with people. Go ahead. No.
Yeah, I'm not a precept epistemologist, right? I don't claim absolute rational justification for my sense perception based worldview. No, you're right.
Okay,
Is
so
there a point to this?
so were you arguing rationally for evolution?
Yeah.
Okay, is the foundation for evolution that you argue for is the very foundation of it? Does it have a rational basis?
Yeah, but
Okay,
the
what is
basis
the
of most
rational
people-
basis? What is the rational basis that things work in a
basis-
certain way?
Yeah, so the basis for most people, not precepts, is
No, I'm
that
talking
we
about
have
you.
to-
I don't care about other people. I'm about you.
as a non-precept, right? I have sense perception, which I seem to have intersubjectively in common with everybody else who I talk to, other than certain people. And so on that basis, we share those presuppositions as axioms.
No, please don't.
And
Not
then
with the
on
we.
top
I'm
of that-
asking you.
Yeah, I just said that's
I don't
how
care what other
operate.
people think. I'm asking you.
That's how I operate, right?
Okay, good. Well, the fact of the matter is, well, when you say operate, that begs the question that there are processes and causal relations. Now, you haven't accounted for that.
You don't understand, Darth. I don't have to account for everything in the universe based on some presuppositional claim of certainty.
Okay, so in other words, what you're saying is certain things that
Can you let
you're
me finish?
arguing for that are the case are when you argue for evolution, is your argument for evolution ultimately baseless?
No.
Okay, good. Can you
It's
tell
based on
me is the
intersubjective agreement between people.
is the foundational basis of evolution is that there are many events and that they are causally related and connected? Is that the basis of evolution?
No, that's the basis of the axiom by which most people
evolution
operate.
evolution doesn't require that there be causal connections and relations between events?
So evolution works whether you believe in it or not.
No, that's not an answer to my question. Another evasive response.
Well, you asked, does evolution only work? The answer is evolution works like most scientific processes, whether people know about it or understand it.
That's not the question I asked. I said, is there a rational foundation to your claim that processes at all, including the ones that you label evolution, are actually occurring? Do you have is there a base to that or not?
Yeah.
Okay.
I
What is the
intersubjectively
base?
verify
What is
experience by
the
talking to other
basis that there
people.
are causal relations then? See, all you're doing, the answers that you give me, and I know you understand the question, all you're doing is giving me deceptive, evasive responses. They're like scripted responses that are not addressing my question. Now,
you have
some
a
of the
script
more
here.
naive people in here will
I
be
don't.
fooled by your answer, but you're not fooling me.
Yeah, so you literally have a script here, Darth, because people have heard you debate this a bunch of times.
Yeah, well, I'm still waiting for an answer. I'm still waiting for an
answer.
answer. Do you have a foundation about the nature of things that will provide ultimately for the viability of evolution?
I share with many other people that I interact with.
I'm not talking about other
intersubjective
people. I'm
confirmation.
talking to you, and
Yeah,
you're
I
talking
just
to
said
me.
I just said I. I said
Okay.
I didn't use any
Okay,
other
okay,
pronoun.
good.
I, right?
Do you have a
I-
rational accounting for the foundation for evolution?
I have an intersubjective standard of evidence, which is called critical rationalism, by which I evaluate things by intersubjectively comparing them with other people and
Okay.
subjecting myself to error correction and error elimination.
Yeah, that was
correct
nice
me
filibustering.
and have
Now,
good
does that
arguments,
entail causal
I
relations?
reevaluate my worldview.
Yeah, is that intersubjective cognition? Does that require that there be causal relations in the chronology of your mental states?
I think so.
Okay. Now, do you hold to that arbitrarily, or do you hold to it rationally?
Not arbitrary.
I mean, I think it's a rational conclusion to draw based
Okay,
on.
what is the rational accounting that there are causal relations in the chronology of your mental states?
So because I perceive mental states that are related to one another, I perceive that they're
Now,
causal.
that's
and-
begging the question again.
Interrupting again.
Okay. Hey, big chum time. Fuck off. Okay.
Anyway,
Now,
Damn, dude.
so 9.
You don't wanna
See,
have the
I
conversation
think the
without
conversation
interrupting.
should end now. Okay, I think we should end it now and wrap it up.
Because you're losing.
Because the fact of the matter is,
Oh,
the
shit.
entire time I've been asking you direct, straightforward, circumspect questions about your metaphysical and your philosophical underpinnings to your claims about certain states of affairs, such as evolution. You have been entirely evasive in giving filibuster answers. And I want to
No.
thank you for that, granting me the opportunity to expose the vacuousness of your foundation for
No.
evolution, which is nothing. You have admitted that you have no foundation at all. And thank you for your
No.
time.
How
So thank
cool
you.
is it that we have
I'm gonna make a
paper
closing
money
remark if I
value?
may.
Like, how
Can
cool
I
is
can
that?
I make a closing remark?
Any
since
round
we're-
of
No, he's
Okay,
gone,
closing
dude.
remark-
He
closing
left.
remark.
He left. He left.
Come on, guys. Let's not scream all together, one at a time.
That was a nice conversation and much better than the one that I had in his room. But just to
I want to
suspend
hear
that,
it.
I think
Yeah.
the key is that if you are holding to something like a critical rationalist like philosophy of science, you would be allergic to the claim that you have some kind of like a presuppositional absolute bedrock proof to rationally base everything on, because you don't. It's the whole point is intersubjective critical error elimination. I don't really understand the appeal of claiming something otherwise, like God did it and therefore I have certainty. Maybe someone else could explain to me what